What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to be continuing the work on the front end of the Miata. If you missed the last episode where we removed the radiator, intercooler, and the intercooler piping, I'll link that video up here so you can get up to speed on what we're doing on the front end of this car. Just a real quick recap, I pulled everything out of here and then I was able to get the sway bar back into the vehicle. That is going to stay in the vehicle. I am not taking that thing back out. I wanted that in all last season and I just never got around to doing this project. Now it's in there, it's not coming back out. So I did a little bit of work on the Miata off camera. I wanted to be able to see if the original mounting points for the radiator could be modified and put into the vehicle without having to fully refabricate new tabs to be able to mount that back into position. I kind of had to chop them up a little bit and cut them into just these little strips. That's gonna be okay. I can add some bracing if need be. However, I think just the way they are should be okay and strong enough. However, when you do something like that with mounting stuff, especially with fluids in them, and speaking of fluids in the radiator, it's like 1.5 gallons of coolant or water. So I mean, that's a lot of weight sitting on just little tabs. Make sure you have enough material there to be able to support that weight. That being said, I'll give you guys a quick little look at what I was kind of working on, just basically down on the frame rails before we really get into fully welding anything and ripping down the strip that needs to go on this front cross member. Now, like I was kind of saying, I did rip down or cut and kind of chop it into a little piece compared to what it was. This is the lower mount for the radiator and the intercooler right there. So I basically took this big chunk out that was sitting back here and ripped it down to where it's this little tab. So what I'm talking about maybe it not being super strong is right here where it's kind of notched out. However, there is like a bend right here. Anytime there's a bend in material, that typically will strengthen it and make it a lot more of a sturdy mount. So it should be okay. I mean, it's got a little wiggle, but not a lot. So I might just tie in a small piece, you know, to this bracket right here. Just like a 1 inch by 1 inch square is all it's gonna really take. Or maybe I'll overlay or put it underneath rather and tie it into the frame rail under here. I'm not really sure what I wanna do here. It is kind of sharp, so if I'm reaching in here, I don't wanna catch my finger or an arm on this. So I'll need to be able to cap that off and clean that sharp point out of there. Also on the upper mounts, I basically did the same thing and I cut the front half of that off. Otherwise it would be hanging out way out here, and then repositioned it. It's like 1.75 inches farther forward. I originally thought it was only gonna need to move like 1 3/8 inches to be able to fit where I want it to go. But I moved the bottom like 1.75 inches and moved the top about the same. It actually moved a lot more than I had originally anticipated and created a bunch more room up front, which is great. We want as much room up here for intercooler piping as we can get. So now that you kind of see where I'm at with what I was doing during the week, we're gonna continue on this project. We're gonna cut those little tabs to kind of brace those lower mounts real quick. And then we're gonna take a larger piece and basically get this square and capped off here so that the radiator doesn't rub on this edge or the bolts that are right behind it. And then we're gonna maybe square off a little bit on the sides, make sure it's nice and rigid, because right now it's got a lot of wiggle right there, and that's all that's supporting the hood and keeping the hood from flying open. So we wanna make sure that's rebraced and held in there really well. So we'll get to it and start cutting up some steel and get some welding done. So we're gonna start off by getting a couple of measurements here of how long this piece needs to be and how like deep down we can go without contacting these tabs, which if we do contact the tabs, it's not that big of a deal right here. That's actually probably gonna help tie everything in. However, I do wanna lay in like a tab on the back side of it to fully square that off. Now, to square that off, I'm only thinking maybe a 1 or 1.5 inch strip there to be able to stitch down onto the top of the frame rail and on the inside of this tab. I'll most likely tack that onto this piece going across first and then drop it in and then kind of stitch weld it to the frame rail. So we'll grab a measurement real quick. We're probably looking at, from tab to tab here, we got 28 inches, and I'd say 28.5 to the actual edges of where the cut cross member is. So we'll maybe cut it a little longer to start out at 28.5 and kind of see how it fits in there before we end up, you know, modifying or cutting it down shorter. I mean, it's metal. You can typically add metal back to it to lengthen it. However, if you can leave it in one whole piece, that's what we're gonna do. So 28.5, we'll just jot that down real quick. And then we'll take a measurement going down. And yeah, it's 1 5/8 inches right here. I would assume it's gonna be the same over here. Yep. So we'll start off with 1.5 inches, and I can kind of bridge the gap there to be able to tie that in. It's not going to be a lot of weld to tie into those tabs. However, if you can just contact the tabs, that's all we really need. So yeah, 1.5 inches by 28.5. We'll start with that. We'll rip down a piece and test fit it in there. I will, however, have to drill a couple of holes for the bolts here, because I did end up like trimming too much material off of here than I really needed to, because there is a gap between the cross member and the top of the radiator right now, but that's okay. Once we lay a piece in here, I do want to put like some foam weather stripping on the front of the radiator up here to kind of seal that off, so it's got a little cushion there, so if this does vibrate, it's not shaking on the aluminum and it doesn't create any type of cracking. When you add vibration to aluminum and rigid mounts or anything like that, it can crack fairly easily. We do have bushings and stuff in here, so it shouldn't cause too much of an issue. I'm also going to take a quick measurement of where I'm going to need to plate this off in the back. So I think all I'm going to do is like a 1 inch by maybe the length of the piece, which is kind of an awkward thing to measure in here because the frame rail's in the way. About 3.5. So 1 inch down by 3.5 inches forward. And we're just gonna plate the whole backside and tie it in. And I'll stitch it on the back and then stitch it kind of around on this side a little bit to fully tie this in. We're gonna do the same thing on the other side as well. Then both of them are all braced where we need them to be. And that should be good for the bottom mount. The top mount has plenty of room to weld all the way around, so I'm not concerned with that being weak or flimsy. We're just looking at the bottom one right now and getting that solid. So instead of the 1 inch by 3.5, we're actually gonna go with 2 3/4. So I already have this strip cut down from something else. So we're just gonna do 1 by 2 3/4, and that should be plenty to be able to brace that bottom mount. So we'll just rip this down, make 2 1 inch cuts here, and then get that tacked into the car real quick. And then we'll work on the big strip after that. I have another sheet. We'll be able to rip that long 28.5 inch piece down and get that test fitted. Now I kind of forgot about this bent piece there. It's got kind of a kicker on that notch. So we're gonna actually use one of these tabs to just brace up and down and stiffen it lengthwise. And we'll maybe trim off another piece to go right in here where this gap is. Otherwise, I should be able to just kind of build up the weld and bridge that gap. I've filled bigger weld gaps than 1/4 inch before in the past. The other side's only 1/8 of an inch, so that's fine. We'll weld right to that, no big deal. And I'll just maybe do the same brace vertically instead of horizontal on the other side as well. So we got the gas purged out, welder is running. We'll get this tacked on real quick, give enough material there to weld on both sides down this strip and around basically the half moon in here, and then the outside edge of this bracket as well. So that tab is in there. We will end up grinding off any sharp corners or anything like that afterwards. So we'll weld basically down this around the half moon and straight down. And then also on the outside, we'll get that welded to the frame rail and the tab underneath so that it's nice and solid. Just tacking it like that made it a lot more rigid. So that should be plenty. And like I said, I can maybe add in a tab right here where this big gap is, or leave it. A little bit of flex there is actually probably gonna be better. So then if there is a front impact, it doesn't completely trash the mounts. So we'll do the same thing on the other side, tack that tab in, and then we'll get to cutting down this long strip and get that tacked in as well. All right, we got that strip cut out here. Basically perfect with my marks in here. Now we're gonna take the paint marker and mark where these bolts are for the hood latch so that we can drill a couple of holes so it clears it and it can press all the way tight to it. However, I mean, I could cut the ends of the bolts off and just press this tight. I don't want to necessarily do that because when you cut bolts, they don't work the same. So we're gonna just drill a couple of holes here and we'll kind of eyeball and guess this for the location just based on looking from the top. My eyes haven't failed me too much yet. We'll go with that, and we can always drill the hole bigger so it goes all the way around these nutserts on the back. Now I'm just hoping that my hole placement is going to be accurate enough. And it is, or will be. Should be just fine. We'll get this tacked in here in just a minute. We want to figure out little plates on the side, maybe. I don't know if we'll actually need to. If I lower this down corner to corner here, yeah, we'll need to tie it in. So when you go to shut the hood, it's gonna push on this and click like that. And it's still pretty floppy. So we'll need to tie something in behind down to the frame rail. And that should be pretty easy to do and fabricate something up on that. So yeah, we'll do that real quick. All right, so I went ahead and tacked in the strip on the backside right here. I know I said I was gonna maybe gusset this or like put some tabs down in here. I don't think I'm gonna do that. I basically just tacked it right to this little tab bracket here. And now it's very solid. It doesn't move. It's all it's gonna need for just the hood, and it's tack welded on the backside here. I am, however, going to go on the inside and try and get a little bit of weld up and inside here. It's gonna be really tricky, but I think I can get in there. Same on that side, so it's welded. It's about a 1/4 inch strip on the front and back side of that. It's only 11 gauge material. It's very thin. It's like 1/8 of an inch. So that little bit of weld there should be fine. Now basically where I have these tacks on the top is where I'm going to stitch weld. So maybe like a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of a weld. Same here, here in the center. I'm not gonna weld it all the way solid. It doesn't need to be solid welded on here. That's just gonna warp the crap out of this piece because this is also really thin material. So when you have really thin material like that, it doesn't like a lot of heat. It will warp, pull, twist, and move, and you don't want it to move. We want this to be nice and solid and stay put so that the hood still functions properly and can stay intact. So we're gonna get this all set up here so that we can lay some welds. We're gonna start with the lower brackets first so that we don't lean over hot welds on this top strip. We're gonna do everything low and farthest away from us first, and then work our way outside of the engine bay to the very outside. So we'll get this all set up here for you so you can see what I'm doing and burn this out real quick so that we can start installing the rest of the pieces back into the car. We're only looking for about 1/8 of an inch in weld size. It doesn't need to be real big. Just welding this much right now is way overkill for what this small tab is, but we're gonna weld it solid anyways. Then it's on there, it's not just gonna fall off. Nice and solid. That ain't going nowhere. Now we'll get inside here underneath this cross member, try and weld this little bracket. It's gonna be kind of interesting. Might have to shuffle this clamp around down and over here so it's out of the way. Should work. Clean the cone off a little bit. It's kind of dirty. This thing throws a little bit of spatter because it's just a little guy. Switch over and weld the other side out real quick, and then we'll jump up to this top and get this thing all finished out. And there we go. We got this welded in here. Kind of a little downhill on the corner to wrap that. And just like those 1-inch stitches like I was talking about. Nothing super crazy. And then down on the inside here, I do need to clean them up a little bit. The tacks from the original test fit are still on here. So I just got to grind those off a little bit, make it look a little pretty and clean. And then underneath, that's all welded in. And the other side, those brackets are all welded in as well. So that means now we're gonna test fit the radiator in here. I already had done that earlier in the week off camera when I set the bottom brackets in place and tacked them in, but we're going to fully set this in there now that it's all welded. Double check that it still fits. It shouldn't be any issue because I tacked them in with the radiator. So we'll get this test fitted so you guys can see it in the car and what it looks like now that it's moved forward and how much room we have in front of the engine. We'll be nice and careful setting this in here so we don't bump anything. Don't want to dent the fins or anything. You can always straighten with a small screwdriver. Rubber bushings just drop into the little loops down there, just like that. And then bolt holes still line up. Yep, perfect. Just like that. Now, I didn't really show a before, like, clip of how close this was. I could maybe try and find something that shows, but like, that's a lot more room in here. So it should create more clearance here with the intake. Just like, I'll have to stretch this hose a little farther. And then the intake is right here. So I mean, it looks like there's a ton more room there, to me anyways. And then down on the bottom, all that clearance here between the sway bar was not there before. I mean, obviously we didn't have a sway bar in there, but now it's got tons of room in here. So I could either run the intercooler piping in this front corner down there or behind the sway bar, kind of like I did in the past with the old stock radiator in there. So it should be plenty good room, either front or back of the sway bar for intercooler piping to squeeze through that. Now the next item of business, we are going to just lightly mount this solid in here. Then we're going to install the intercooler in front of the radiator and get just the bolts finger tight so that we can start setting up the charge piping on the turbo side and the intake side, so that we can kind of figure out the routing. We might have to change things up a little bit, and I went and got a couple new 90-degree silicone couplers because I had an aluminum pipe here, like a 90 with pie cuts, with a straight silicone coupler. I want to make that a little bit different here, just so it's not as like restrictive in how I can mount this in here. With a silicone coupler, you can kind of bend that and turn it around a little bit more, and there's a little bit more wiggle room for how you position things. Now these mounting points should be in the same position or really dang close to where they were before. I'm just hoping we don't have to tweak them too much. I'll kind of only really be able to tell once we start getting them actually tightened down. This top one seems like it's gonna be a little snug. This one's good. So I got this mounted up here, and this side is a little closer than I want right here. So I kind of marked out where I want to cut this with the cutoff wheel, just so it clears. Getting a silicone coupler on here and a clamp is going to be really difficult. And then when you look at the other side, this side is fine, but I marked out basically the same thing so that I can do the same cut on this side. So we'll get this notched out along with the other side, and then that should basically work where it is. Now that the intercooler is mounted up in there, we're gonna start getting some stuff with the charge piping back in position, try and test fit some stuff. This is one of the new 90-degree silicone couplers that I picked up. It's replacing a bunch of pie cuts on aluminum that was pretty rigid and it was rubbing on this hose. I would much rather have silicone rubbing on silicone than aluminum welds on the silicone radiator hose, because it was starting to wear into that a little bit, and we don't want that. So we're basically taking this tight 90 and replacing it with this silicone coupler instead. It's about the same radius of a bend there. So I mean, we're not really changing a whole lot. That should be plenty good. Then if we need to, we can reuse this 90-degree aluminum with the other couplers somewhere else if we needed to. And I mean, I still have another 90-degree silicone coupler. I bought a 2-pack, so we could replace with silicone anyway somewhere else if we had to. So we're gonna put in the down piece right here with the blow-off valve on the inside. And I think we're gonna end up going behind the sway bar. That's probably gonna be our best bet, especially with aluminum. This is a little tighter in front of the sway bar. We have more room behind it. So that's what we'll try and do. And we can kind of bend and move this rubber silicone coupler if we need to. I'll probably have to go from the bottom with this one. We might end up using the other 90-degree silicone coupler instead of this down here. Or if this is actually tighter, we might put this one up here. However, we do need to get this like idle control valve tube back in here, so that might be too close to do that. I don't think that's gonna work. So we'll keep that down on the bottom for now. All right, so I got a quick update for you. I just took a little bit of time and played around with different pieces of the intercooler piping and silicone couplers. I got a pack of new clamps and everything, so I just wanted to try and fit as much up as I can and just kind of get that out of the way. You kind of just need to focus and think about that and not have to sit there and chit chat while you're trying to do it. It's just one big puzzle with a bunch of pieces, and you have to try and fit it together the best way you can and the shortest routing so that everything clears and everything fits right. So I got this all kind of in place, probably temporary. I have to pull the radiator and intercooler back out so that I can paint where there's bare metal and welds so it doesn't rust. We want to seal all that, so I'll give you a quick peek what we got going on. So just looking at it from the top, I have the radiator line or hose on, so it's kind of pulled at a weird angle still. I really don't like how this comes straight off and it's still in line with the intake. I mean, regardless how you do this, either I would have to move this side of the radiator back and kind of angle that to turn that at an angle, or I just kind of have to deal with it, or I cut it off, take it to work, and I weld it at an angle for it to clear better. But being there's a silicone coupler here now, it's not as big of a deal because it's not like radiator hose rubbing on a solid material. So that I think is gonna work. Down towards the bottom, there's a little wiggle room on that intercooler piping there. It might vibrate, so I might end up putting like some hockey tape that's a little softer material in here to kind of cushion that so it doesn't just rub on the steel sway bar. And we got clearance behind where the alternator pulley is, so that should be fine. That's kind of how I had it set up with the stock radiator. Now I did change up the piping on this side. I originally had a 90-degree silicone coupler here. We switched that out with one of the aluminum pieces that I had either up there or on the other side. I can't remember exactly. Now there's two silicone couplers here, and then it was like basically one of these pieces on a 90 right here. But because we moved the intercooler forward 1.5 inches, that changed the distance from the outlet of the intercooler to the up pipe for the intake. So I cut out a straight piece of aluminum so that we can kind of bridge the distance here and stretch it a little bit. So that actually tightened it up here and created more steering clearance to the intercooler piping, which is great. We needed that anyways. And then one side has a bead roll on it, the other side did not. So if you're unfamiliar with how intercooler piping works, you need to have some sort of a lip on any of the piping for the clamp to fully secure itself and seal properly in a silicone coupler. So I don't have a bead roller or anything like that, but I do have like a center punch and a couple of things that I could kind of use to massage the inside of the tube to create that lip on the outside. What I used was this large, like 3/8 easy out tap, because on the end of it, you can kind of see it's a very wide angled tip. It's not super sharp, it's kind of dull. So I was able to kind of like basically show you on here, go from the inside like this and hammer that down and actually put a lip. So I'll do that real quick so I can show you what I'm talking about. All right, so I just did that, a couple of spots here. So you can kind of see it raises that edge just a little bit and it creates a little dimple on the inside so it pushes the material out, but it's not sharp enough to actually puncture the tube. So it's not going to create a leak point. It just creates that little bit of a lip on the outside. So when you get your clamp mounted over here, it has a little bit more meat or material there to grab onto. So when you get under boost or under load, this doesn't just spit out of the coupler, it actually can hold on there. So it's not quite as extreme as like a normal bead roll like that, but it at least creates some sort of lip or material or bite for the clamp to hold on to. So I did that on the straight piece over here, as well as a new 45 piece that's right in here to go around the coolant hose. I had to do that on both ends of that so that it can grab on a lot better and hold that material properly. So that being said, with this side over here, I had to change this up as well. So I had originally a 90-degree aluminum piece coming off right here, but I switched that out with a silicone coupler so it's got a little bit more flex here. That's okay to add that. And then there's like a wide radius 90-degree aluminum piece right here to kind of replace what I had in here to kind of go through where the coolant hose is right there. It was kind of a stretch because I moved everything forward. It changed all the position of this side as well. So that's why this is bigger, you know, radius coming around here, and then it adds another one. It's not a full 90 because I actually slid it almost 2.5 inches into the coupler just so I could get it positioned right to line up with this 45 that goes up into the weld-on portion. This is like solid welded to the turbo here. So I kind of have to work with what this is without cutting it apart and refabricating that tube coming down from the turbo. So kind of what I was saying, I needed to just kind of focus on that. There's a lot of pieces that needed to change and be adjusted so that it fits properly and aligns in there. You don't want too much tension on any of your intercooler charge pipes. You want it to kind of free float and move. If you put too much pull and tension on stuff, you're more likely to have a coupler fail or blow off when you're in drift or under load when it's building boost. You don't want that. So I had a lot of problems with the first version of everything that I built. That was almost 2 years ago already. And I struggled all year blowing couplers off, and I hated it. And I fixed it. Last year I had no issues with it whatsoever. We're gonna continue that this year. And you just need to take time and be patient with fitting up your intercooler piping. Otherwise, if you rush it, you can run into problems later. So there is some more stuff that I have to do. I have to maybe move some stuff a little bit more just to try and get it exactly how I want it. The more couplers you have, the more leak points there are. So if you can eliminate some couplers, try to do that the best you can. So I'm gonna try and eliminate one here in just a minute. I just have to move the coolant hose around. So because we have this radiator hose, this is the return line to the bottom of the radiator. It comes off with like a 90-degree silicone and then basically a straight to a 90 in an aluminum pipe. I might have to remove that or change it up a little bit because I'm kind of limited where I can put this right now, and I need it to go lower and over to the side because it's rubbing on my turbo drain line down there, and I actually need to remove that pretty quick here and get that remade because it's leaking. I don't know why it's leaking, but I need to get that kind of redone and rebuilt so that we don't have any oil leaking problems, because that's on the hot side and you can create a fire situation. So I'm gonna probably put the camera down and adjust some stuff on this side a little bit off camera, but I have some new radiator hoses that I can kind of play with in there if I need to kind of switch that around to create more room. I like that it's up kind of high on the frame rail, but I might move and adjust that a little bit. Got a quick update for you. I've been putting with this for probably 45 minutes to an hour or something like that, trying to get the turbo side radiator hose to the radiator kind of resituated, remade up so that it's gonna clear and create more room for intercooler piping down below. So I'll show you guys that real quick. So we used the steel tube that was technically mounted the other direction. I just flipped it over and I cut the tab off that would mount it up on this little tab up here. So I want to get that cut out at some point. We don't need that anymore. I'm not going to put that back on there. I only had one of the screws holding it in to begin with. So I basically flipped it off here. I took the longer radiator hose that I had up here and basically shortened it up a little bit so that it now comes up a little bit and creates more room down here for intercooler piping. And then it goes on the front side of the sway bar rather than the back side of the sway bar with a small little 90-degree silicone tube down on the bottom. So now that's just little piece down here. And then we're gonna utilize the OEM clamps. These guys, these pinch clamps are probably the best clamping force you can get. I don't know why they don't make an aftermarket version of these. Maybe they do and I just haven't found them. But those have so much more clamping force than say like these. These are so cheap, they fall apart and then you strip them out. If you can avoid those, do it. Some of the T-bolt clamps are good. These old ones that I have, they're like a grade 5 and they strip out really bad. The new ones I have are a grade 8 bolt on here, and these ones, super solid, way better quality than the other ones. But that's kind of where we're at right now. I'm gonna keep plugging away at this a little bit, try and finalize where the radiator hose is gonna be sitting, and probably get all the clamps on there and situated, because I think we can basically leave it where it is, and then get the intercooler piping down here finalized. We should be able to utilize this longer piece now, again, so that we don't have to have two silicone couplers right there. This would basically eliminate that and kind of, you know, hopefully attach it right to this 90 coming off of the intercooler, and then go right up to where that comes out from the turbo. So we're making progress here. Just gotta play with it a little bit. It's one giant puzzle where you just gotta fit everything together the best you can. And then hopefully the final product will work out and we won't have any boost leak issues and everything should hold together really well. So I'll keep plugging away at this, hopefully get this knocked out really fast, and I'll show you guys when I get it a little closer. All right, another check-in real quick. I did get all the intercooler piping situated and where I want it to be. Also got the radiator hoses on the turbo side all figured out, ready to go. We should be all set. I went ahead and pulled the radiator and intercooler all back out so that we can now prep during the week for spray painting where the welding was and all the grinding. Because it's all bare metal down here, we want to make sure that we can get this all sealed on this plate as well. Make sure all those welds are nice and covered. And then on the back side in here, it's gonna be hard to see, but that's bare in there too. So I'll probably go up there with a piece of sandpaper and just kind of rough it up a little bit. And then we'll get some primer on there along with these spots here. I believe I mentioned that a little earlier. We'll try and get that sprayed too and get that sealed off. So at least it matches the rest of the car and it's not this weird green primer that's behind it. That being said, we're gonna end out today's video right there. We got a lot accomplished today in this episode. We got the radiator moved, we got the intercooler and intercooler piping all situated. So we should be all set with this new location for the radiator. Now it's just painting it up and getting everything bolted back in the car, hard mounted. And then we do have to bleed the coolant system. We'll do that during the week. I won't really show that. It's pretty simple stuff. I've done that in the past. So we'll get this all situated back together. So we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.